Welcome to the second League webinar on House File 718, passed in May 2023 by the Iowa Legislature and signed into law by Governor Reynolds. I am Erin Mullenix, Research Director for the Iowa League of Cities. Today, we're going to take a closer look at Division 2 of the new law only, so we will be a bit more technical than in the first League webinar. Our intended audience are the folks responsible for working on city budgets. I'll note that the first webinar on House File 718 is available and recorded on the League's website. It covers what is in the new law and all of the divisions impacting city government at a high level. So if you haven't already joined us for that webinar or viewed the recording, that's your place to start, and then come back to listen to this one. The League also has a dedicated webpage or two on House File 718 and summaries of its impact in its June and August Cityscape magazine issues, and likely more to come. Again, the new law has 14 divisions, 9 of which we think impact cities directly, but for today's webinar, we're going to focus on Division 2, and we'll dig right in. You will want to have your city's fiscal year 2024 budget certification page handy as we step through a few examples in this webinar. So to generally review Division 2, the new law takes and combines the former regular general fund levy, commonly known as the 810 levy, with several other levies. And then those levies are deleted after they're combined into the new baseline. The sample now on your screen is from the fiscal year 2024 budgets, but you will expect a totally new form next year since other portions of the law have changed. I'm displaying this one for you today so you'll know where to find and combine your levies to set up your baseline adjusted combined general fund levy. So as we look at this is derived from the fiscal year 2024 budget certification page. You can see the levies with the red highlighted boxes as the levies that are going to be eliminated after they're combined into the new 810. So what you would do is you would look at the prior year. So for example, if we use the fiscal year 2024 baseline as we calculate fiscal year 25, we're going to look back at our fiscal year 2024 budget certification page, look at which levies that are highlighted in red that the community used, and add together the rate that corresponds with those levies. After we add those together, we're going to add it to our regular general fund levy. So the box highlighted here in green, sum them all up, and that will be the baseline adjusted combined general fund levy. Since the baseline year is your fiscal year 2024 budget, you will use that as you look to do your fiscal year 2025 budget. So the baseline 2024 is actually the fiscal year that we're in today as of this recording. So each year's new adjusted combined general fund levy maximum for fiscal year 2025 to 2028 will be based on the prior year, and the calculation starts fresh and resets each year. As we look through these slides that are in front of you, the new adjusted city general fund levy is also shortened by either ACGFL or CGFL, as the acronym has changed. So Division 2 says that we calculate the new combined general fund levy limit over the fiscal years 2025 to 2028. And then we will calculate the new maximum each year dependent upon your city's non-TIF taxable property tax valuations, including gas and electric utilities, but excluding ag. This is the amount you include under line 2A on your budget certification page. So for shorthand on this webinar, I'll refer to this valuation as your line 2A valuation. And on your screen, you see the location which you would normally find this on your budget certification page, with the notation that this page may change in the future. So based on this growth rate, your city will fall into one of 3 tiers. And note that your tier can change and starts new for each one of those budget years from fiscal year 2025 to 2028. So we'll start with tier 1. If your line 2A valuation grows by less than 3% or is negative, your city will be considered a tier 1 city for that year. If a tier 1 city has a baseline rate from the previous year that is over $8.10, then the city will be able to carry over its baseline CGFL, its combined general fund levy, from the previous year as its new maximum for the year it's budgeting. For example, if you started at $8.37, but you're on tier 1, you're under the growth trigger of 3%, then you could carry over up to the $8.37 for fiscal year 25, and so on for each year. If a tier 1 city, though, has a baseline from the previous year that's under $8.10, it would be able to go up to $8.10 for that budget year. Now, tier 2. If the line 2A valuation grows by 3% or more, but under 6%, the city will be considered a tier 2 city for that year, and a formula is used to lower the allowed combined general fund levy maximum for that year. The formula works to reduce the combined general fund levy in order to approximately reduce revenue growth by about 2%. So if we look at the formula at the bottom of the screen in the yellow box, that is the formula that's used to determine the new levy rate. For tier 2, the reduction percentage here is going to be 1.02. And now tier 3. If your line 2A valuation grows by 6% or more, the city is considered a tier 3 city for that year. And if the formula is used to lower your allowed maximum for your combined general fund levy for that year. So the formula again here works to reduce the general fund levy in order to approximately reduce revenue growth by about 3% for those in tier 3. So here in the formula in the yellow box, if you're a tier 3 city for that year, you're going to use 1.03 in this denominator of the equation. A city can always choose to use a lower levy. After running through some of the examples, I will talk a little bit more about some of these potential impacts that'll be important as you plan ahead for your budget year. Then beginning in fiscal year 2029, all cities will have a new maximum combined general fund levy of $8.10. The original levies combined to make these new levies will remain eliminated. So it is truly a new $8.10. Any cities under $8.10 for the combined general fund levy in fiscal year 2029 and forward can go up to $8.10 beginning in that fiscal year 2029. And any cities over $8.10 and for fiscal year 2029 and forward will go to an $8.10 maximum beginning. They will drop down beginning in fiscal year 2029. And that last part is important to point out. We've heard from some cities that aren't sure whether they would be growing by at least 3% each year and wonder if they'll be impacted under this division of the bill. So we know that they will be impacted for any year that they grow their line 2A valuation by at least 3%. And also that in fiscal year 2029, they'll be subject to drop down to the new $8.10 combined general fund levy limit. Okay, so those are the basics. Let's run through 3 example cities with different scenarios to show what these calculations look like. We're going to talk about the 3 member communities, Adel, Bennett, and Ames. And in just a moment, I will switch the screen sharing so that you can see a spreadsheet. We're going to start with Adel. Adel is an example of a fast growth community. You are seeing on your screen a spreadsheet that I put together for Adel. Right here in column B, lines 4 to 6. These are simple inputs that I took from their fiscal year 2024 budget baseline. So it's their line 2A value. I derived their combined general fund levy to be $8.37. So as we looked before at the budget certification page with the red and green highlighted boxes, adding together the ones that Adel used for fiscal year 2024, we get to $8.37. So that's here. And then the revenue calculated for the CGFL, for the combined general fund levy for that year. Columns, row 4 for columns D, F, H, and J are showing the assumptions that we've assumed that the valuations have increased. So since Adel is fast growing, I made the assumption that it grows by 7% in all of fiscal years 2025 to 2028. Purely an assumption on my part. So for fiscal year 25, the formula to ratchet down the combined general fund levy shows the decrease in its levy rate from the original baseline fiscal year 2024 of $8.37. So let's look at the math. The formula says it's 1,000 multiplied by cell B6, which is the revenue generated by the combined general fund levy in the prior year. So fiscal year 24 for this case. And then divided by the denominator, which is multiplying the reduction percentage. Since we're in tier 3, I assume 7% growth. We're in tier 3, 1.03 multiplied by cell B4, which is line 2A from the prior year. So that calculation spits out $8.13 for the fiscal year 2025 budget with those assumptions. So then I do a similar calculation. And again, I'm assuming 7% growth each year for Adele. And I'm moving the valuations by that 7% and then running the calculation again. I get $7.89 for fiscal year 26, $7.66 for fiscal year 27, and finally $7.44 for fiscal year 28. Then in fiscal year 29 and forward, Adele could choose to go up to $8.10 because they were under that in fiscal year 2028. So that's the new max for all cities starting in fiscal year 2029. So you could take a look at Adele's other scenarios. The tiers are also calculated and shown here, but I will just include the reminder that each year depends upon the year prior. So you can't look forward and look for that worst case scenario. The next tab is going to show Adele's very general impact. I copied over from the previous tab, lines 4 to 6. And rows 8 to 11 here show Adele's tier 3 scenario, that they're in high growth. Again, these were just assumed for this demonstration. Lines 13 to 16 are showing what would have been generated if Adele's fiscal year 24 flat rate combined general fund levy and keeping its valuation growth assumption at 7% per year. So in other words, we increase the valuation growth at 7%, but we stick with the original $8.37 rate from the 2024 baseline. So row 18 in blue shows the year-to-year impact as a loss. And row 19 shows the cumulative impact as a loss over the 4 fiscal years impacted. Then under that, I wanted to display this for having controlled for valuation. So lines 21 to 24 control both the levy at the fiscal year 24 baseline rate of $8.37 with a controlled flat valuation. And lines 26 to 29 show the controlled flat valuation, but the assumed CGFL, the combined levy change that we calculated year over year. So with that difference in mind, we look at row 31 showing the year over year impact, and then 32 showing the cumulative impact. So whether or not you control for valuations, you can see here a significant impact due to these changes. Next, I'll flip to the city of Bennett, and we chose Bennett to represent a low growth community, but we're just making the assumption here that they grow at 1% each year for fiscal years 25 to 28. For example purposes, they could be a faster growing community and fall into one of these other tiers. So Bennett starts off with an $8.37 baseline from looking at their fiscal year 2024 budget. And I get to this $8.37 because I looked at their budget certification page and I combined their original $8.10 levy and their 27-cent emergency levy. They didn't use any of the other levies that were combined and eliminated. And because Bennett is assumed to be either under both of the growth triggers for its line 2A value, it can keep and carry over the prior year's combined general fund levy as its limit for the subsequent year. So we are going to assume this for this demonstration, and Bennett keeps 837 for each of fiscal years 25 to 28. And then in fiscal year 29, it's important to point out that Bennett would drop right away to $8.10 because that'll be the new limit on the combined general fund levy for all cities beginning with that year. If we flip to the next tab for Bennett and compare the pre-House File 718 scenario, similar to what we did for Adele, we get no additional revenue impact, except for noting that Bennett could have otherwise used or increased an authorized levy that's now combined, but is no longer able to because it'd be eliminated. And to point out that it will drop in 2029 and moving forward. Now we will go to the city of Ames as an example of a city that has a starting baseline for fiscal year 2024 that's already under 810. And we're going to make the assumption that it has variable growth. Because of this variable growth assumption, Ames is going to require an extra set of analysis. We'll get to that in a moment. I'm going to assume for this example that Ames had 4% growth in fiscal year 25, putting it in tier 2, 1% growth in fiscal year 26, putting it in tier 1, and then 4% growth in both fiscal year 27 and 28, putting it back into tier 2 for both of those years. And again, just assumptions for example purposes. So for fiscal year 25, the calculation shows Ames going from its baseline of $6.34 to $6.22 in fiscal year 25, because it triggers the tier 2 3 to 6% growth level. We assume 4%. So the calculation there, the math is 1,000 multiplied by B6, which is the revenue generated the previous year by the combined general fund levy, and then divided by the denominator, which is 1.02. That's the reduction factor for tier 2, multiplied by B4, which is the line 2A valuation from the prior year. And that gives us 622 for fiscal year 25. In fiscal year 26, we'll say that Ames is below both growth triggers at just 1% growth. And in a case where a city like Ames is below 3% growth and the prior year was under 810, Ames could choose to go up to the 810 limit for its new maximum for that budget year's combined general fund levy. So it could go up to 810 here. But so for example purposes, I'm going to show two different scenarios. One where Ames chooses to stay at the rate from the prior year at 622, and another where it assumes the 810 max. And I'll note that jumps or changes of that magnitude are pretty rare for cities because of the volatility and often are deemed unfavorable. So for the spreadsheet here, let's first keep the prior year rate of 622 for fiscal year 26, and then running the calculation again for fiscal years 27 and 28 in tier 2, we calculate out $6.10 for fiscal year 27, and then $5.98 for fiscal year 28. And I'll note again that beginning in fiscal year 29, Ames, as well as any other city, could choose to go up to 810 if they would like, beginning with that budget year. So the next tab shows the impact on the city of Ames budget under this scenario. Lines 4 to 16 here are copied over from the prior slide for reference. And then lines 18 to 21 show the controlled flat baseline rate from the fiscal year 2024 of $6.34. Rows 23 to 24 then show the year-to-year impact as a loss and the cumulative impact compared to the prior to House File 718 baseline levy rate. If we move the screen down, then in lines 26 to 34 here, we control for the line 2A valuation. Lines 26 to 29 control for the baseline levy, and lines 31 to 34 use the new assumed levies based on the assumed growth So lines 36 and 37 then show the year-to-year impact as a loss and the cumulative impact as a loss over fiscal years 2025 to 2028. Again, this assumes the selected growth rates and each year impacts the next within these example scenarios. So when we go to the next tab, we're going to show option B that Ames could have had with that change in fiscal year 26 as a possibility. So as a city under the 810 and in the prior year and under both of the growth triggers, so that's under 3% line 2A growth for that city, a city with those criteria could choose to go up to 810 in that fiscal year. So we just walked through the scenario where Ames chose not to change its rate. And this tab shows what would happen if we decided to increase in fiscal year 26 to 810. So going from 622 then to 810. Again, that may be a pretty unlikely occurrence due to it being a very significant jump, but we do want to show both for this webinar demonstration. If Ames chose to go up to 810 for fiscal year 26 and then fell back into the tier 2 growth tier, because we assume 4% for fiscal years 27 and 28, then its combined general fund levy rate would go to 794 in fiscal year 27, and then finally 779 in fiscal year 28. Then, like all cities, again, it can go up to the 810 maximum in fiscal year 2029 and forward. The next tab shows the comparison to the prior House File 718 under this alternative option. The difference is huge, and Ames would generate an increase in revenue dollars under this demonstration of this alternative option and under the assumptions. I note again that this scenario would be historically rare if we looked at through the data, but possible under the new law. So I'll scroll down so you can see the final difference. Okay, and that wraps up the city demonstration portion, but I'll briefly now mention a few potential impacts that we should keep in mind with our upcoming budget season. And I'll go back to the original summary slide. So as we approach the upcoming budget season, we'll want to keep an eye on valuation trends in your community, in your city, including tax increment finance planning, since line 2A valuations are based on the growth are based on non-TIF for each year. So that's any changes in our tax increment finance planning is going to impact that valuation. Also, odd year valuation growth we might see due to the assessment cycle, potential spikes in odd years due to that revaluation growth. It's also important to mention that other limiting mechanisms like the allowable growth limits, which are commonly known as rollbacks, do remain in place and layer with the new law. Let's talk about debt. Since the debt levy is not included in the new combined general fund levy, it'll be interesting to keep an eye on debt levels. Keeping in mind, cities still have to adhere to the constitutional debt limit. And on infrastructure, while the capital improvement levy is not combined into the new combined general fund levy, we've also heard from member cities that they're sometimes forced to defer maintenance or consider that when faced with competing priorities and needs. And on that note, departments may also compete internally for funding since revenues could decrease under this law. I also point out that according to the old Legislative Services Agency fiscal note on a prior but similar version to this bill, that over a 6-year period for which data was available from the state fiscal years 17 to 23, that over 90% of cities would have exceeded the 2.5% growth trigger that was in that previous version. So important to point that out, at least once during those 6 years. Now, the new law's lowest growth trigger is at a 3% threshold. So there is a difference there, but we could likely assume that many cities will be at least into the tier 2 formula to reduce their revenue growth by means of the limiting the new combined general fund levy at least one time over the 4-year period in the new law might be a reasonable assumption. I'll wrap up by reminding cities to pay close attention to the budget timelines that also change in another division of the bill. And please don't hesitate to reach out to the league or the State Department of Management if you have additional questions as we roll into this budget season. Thank you for listening and have a great day.